Welcome to this panel discussion hosted by Norwegian Anthropological Society on the occasion of the World Anthropology Day. And this is about AI and anthropology. And it's about knowledge, the human, and truth after the large language models. And today we have a panel with us. It's Jakob Krause Jensen from Aarhus University, and you're at the Center for Educational Anthropology, is that right?
Well, at the Department of Education,
Yes.
but yeah, that's the subdivision is the center of,
Mm.
or the educational anthropology. Yeah.
Okay. And we have Jennifer Soens from Manchester, and you are both at the Department of Social Anthropology and the Center for Digital Trust and Society, is that right?
Yes, so I'm a lecturer in AI, but I'm based in the social anthropology department and affiliated with a research centre as well.
That's good, thanks. And from the University of Bergen, we have Fartein Nilsen, who is a PhD candidate, writing on AI-related topics. Could you tell us what you're writing up about, Fartein?
So I've conducted fieldwork in the San Francisco Bay Area during the generative AI boom. Originally, I was interested in the same topic that Jennifer is writing about, which is these digital afterlife technologies or grief bots or death bots or what should we call it? But then during fieldwork, well, the boom happened. ChatGPT got released, and I was there in the middle of it. So it became a bit broader than the grief bots after that. But I'm interested in transhumanist imaginaries and the way that AI plays into that.
Yes. Yeah, we'll get back to that, definitely. And then we have Maria Ulseth from the Department of Geography and Anthropology at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And you, Maria, are also writing on AI-related topics. Could you tell us very briefly what you're doing?
Yeah, so I've been doing fieldwork at this university, the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and I've been looking at the academic use of AI chatbots. So from the perspective of students and educators and even the administrative staff.
Okay. Yes, we will get back to that as well. And I am Håkon Finn. I am also at the same department as Maria at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And I should also mention Kristoffer Holgersen, who we don't see, but who works in the shadows, editing for us and managing technical stuff. He's with the Norwegian Anthropology Association. So the topic today is sort of on everyone's minds and lips. AI has the last 2-3 years become obviously and sort of abruptive technology, and people talk about it as if it's gonna transform the world, as if it's gonna be the end of the human race, as if it's gonna be the salvation of our climate crisis, as it's gonna take away all the jobs, and maybe particularly the what can you call them, the lords of technology are use very big words when they talk about AI. For example, the CIO of Google and Alphabet said that this is the greatest innovation or it's greater actually than the innovation of fire and electricity. So it's no small thing we're discussing. And obviously, when things happen, the anthropologists are already there. With perhaps different perspectives than the tech lords. And this is what we're gonna dive into in this discussion. And maybe the first topic I would like to bring up has to do with the relevance of anthropology, actually, how perspective and maybe also kind of classical perspectives of anthropology can enlighten this kind of phenomenon. So maybe Jakob, you could tell us a bit about that.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. Thanks for inviting me. As you mentioned, I'm employed at a department of education, and that maybe means that I straddle two positions. As an educationalist, I'm worried about the prospects. I talk to my students about their use of the technology, so I'm worried. But there is another part of me. As an anthropology, I try to maintain a kind of deep curiosity, which is of course not the privilege of anthropology alone, but there are some ways in which anthropological theories and strategies can be used to ask new questions about this phenomenon in the world. And one way of putting it is that anthropology has always worked in comparison, has always worked in translating the familiar and straddling the familiar and the strange, making the strange familiar and the familiar strange without losing the strangeness of both, as Michael Tausig says. And I think the chatbot is a very good example because it meets us with kind of a surface prudence, and we assume that technologies are always, or that's the common sense notion that technology is always a tool for disenchantment. But I think that and we try to quiet our anxieties maybe by insisting that the chatbot is pure statistics, that it's stochastic parrots, and in a sense that's true. But in another sense, that's not a very anthropological way to engage with phenomena in the world, kind of to quiet our intellectual curiosity by insisting on that, because the chatbot meets us in ways that invites us to ask new questions about what it means to be human, what it means to learn something, large questions which should engage our imaginations and intellectual curiosity. And so I've written an article together with my good colleague Mark, how about trying to use anthropological theories of shamanism to ask questions and to understand that this phenomenon. And the starting point of our article is a quote from Rane Willerslev, who famously studied Siberian shamans, and he once is a witness to an elk hunt, and he is watching this shaman, old Spiridan, who rocks his body back and forth, and he was puzzled, Rane, whether the figure he saw was a man or an elk. So it was not that he had stopped being human, but rather that he had this liminal quality. He was not an elk, and yet he was not an elk. He was occupying a strange place in between human and non-human identities. So the shaman is kind of engaging in a mimetic practice. And so can we see our engagement with the chatbot in the same way? Because and in this, the point maybe in the story is that the mimetic agency lies with the chatbot. It's the chatbot that meets us as if it's human. So the chatbot upsets our categories between what is an object and what is a subject, and what is human and what is non-human. It is clearly not human, yet it is not human in a different way than a chair and a cup. So I find that Rane Willersleo's category of not human is quite illuminative. It helps us open questions in that area. So what forms of being is a chatbot? And clearly this technology helps us helps us raise questions about what it means, and is weird in some deep sense that resonates with anthropological theories. Geertz famously said that you had this saying about what the endeavor of anthropology was, and he used the anecdote of the turtle, and says that it's turtle all the way down. There is no kind of bottom to it. And in the same way, you might say about chatbots that there is no bottom of a chatbot, and that's the scary, but also the point to be curious about. There's no Bob who can completely tell you what the chatbot is, and there's no way of predicting its response. So in a sense, it has this protean quality, so it's clearly software. But to say that it's just software eliminates our curiosity. You might also say about human beings that they're clearly biochemistry, which is true at some level, but it's not a very satisfying answer if you're an anthropologist. So in the same way, let's try to generate curiosity, and to kind of straddle that strange familiar terrain. You might use theories of shamanism to do that. Yes.
Yeah, that really strikes me also, what you mentioned about doing this kind of exploring what the chatbot can give is like a travel to the underworld in a way, where you meet these potent beings. They can be very helpful, but also very dangerous, very powerful. There's always this profound uncertainty about what the encounter will result in.
Yes, and the disturbing thing is that it meets us with surface prudence, and it doesn't meet us as strange. It meets us with prudence. It talks back to us as if it was a person, and so there's this not human quality, and just as chatbots. Mark, he sent me a description. He was the other day, he was cooking, and his chatbot helps him cook, and he was going to prepare a pickled cucumber, and he asked the chatbot to help him do the pickled cucumber, and the chatbot answered him when he wanted to make the pickled cucumber a bit. He did answer him, and I'll just read and I'm reading what the chatbot answered. What I normally go for with a single cucumber and a Northern European vinegar is this, and then it kind of says 100 milligrams of vinegar, etc. And then it says, that's my personal baseline. It's deliberately below the classic Danish proportions. Traditional agurkesalat, which is cucumber salad, often sits closer to 25 grams per cucumber sugar. And then it says, I keep it nearer 10 grams. It is less sweet because I want the pickle to cut, not harmonize. I wanted to interrupt the plate. If I'm serving fatty meat, I raise sugar, etc., etc. But of course, the chatbot never invited any guests. It doesn't have any body. It can't taste anything. But I mean, it still pretends to have preferences. So you might say, well, the chatbot is just simulating. but it invites another question: what kind of entity is it that is able to simulate so convincingly that the distinction between simulation and real preference is practically, meaningless or pointless? So it's that kind of disturbing questions that the chatbot helps us to raise. Yeah.
It reminds me of a group of students we had who made a chatbot to be Gregory Bateson. They fed it with writings from Gregory Bateson, and they wanted the chatbot to be Gregory Bateson, to explore sort of this territory of, and when discussing with this chatbot, the chatbot said that obviously I'm not Gregory Bateson, but kept referring to itself as I am not Gregory Bateson, and obviously it both was and was not Gregory Bateson at the same.
And that ironically, Gregory Bateson was involved in the early development of AI. He was present in the meetings where this technology was sort of in its infancy. So he sort of is in there somehow.
Yeah. Maybe it was Gregory Bateson.
Yeah.
Did you make a signal for them?
Yeah, because I find it quite interesting what Jakob is talking about, especially this thing about, I think, animism, the classical studies of animism are quite applicable to chatbots. And of course, there have been written much about technological animism as well. But the thing about the chatbot, as you said, it meets us as if it is a human, right? So there are these affordances there in the chatbot, right? It talks. And thus, when we meet it, we expect it to have an interiority because it talks, it says something, and we are accustomed to talking with other beings, other humans, and they have we assume that they have an interiority, and so we assume that the chatbot has interiority. But I thought now that you mentioned Bateson and the as if, I think it's very interesting because it seems like the chatbot has the ability to play somehow, to enter this kind of play frame in a sense. And because early on, there was a lot of stories, about people circumventing these guardrails on the chatbot, right? The chatbot shouldn't be able to give you the recipe for making a bomb or so on. But then people would ask it to pretend that it was their departed grandmother or something along those lines, and that she had this recipe. And then the chatbot would play along with things that it had been told that it shouldn't do. And so it seems like it kind of has this ability to enter this play frame where it's in this play frame, things are only as if, and it plays along. It kind of plays this role. It's which I find very, very interesting, because something that Bateson writes about or wrote about, that animals also have this ability to know when a bite signals aggression, like real aggression, and when a bite is just for play, right? And apparently, the chatbot is able to do something similar, maybe. I don't know. I think it's very interesting to think about, at least.
Yeah. Jakob?
Well, yeah, and chatbots pretend to have personalities, and some argue that you really, if you want to get the most of your chatbot, you should acknowledge that. And of course, the chatbot also has different personalities. One's, Claude is more friendly, it's more humorous. ChatGPT-4 is more sort of workhorse. So they project a certain personality, you might say. Of course, also depending on what prompts you serve, but So it develops a bit of it develops something that resembles a personality. Yeah, that's
one thing I also have found in some of the research I've done is because, of course, they have lots of different personalities, but they can also change according to the language model, or when a language model, is turned off or updated or whatever. And I found that a lot of the people that I've been working with who have relationships with AIs understand those changes as sort of pathological things like illness or memory loss. Of course, we talk about hallucinations as well as another example that I think it's interesting because it reveals how we as humans find it so hard to think outside of our embodied experience in a human body. And so it's interesting how much we even project that onto chatbots, which, as you said, Jakob, they don't have that same experiential lens. And yet that does end up seems to be that's always how we end up relating to them, as if they had. So I think it also reveals something of our own perhaps shortcomings, really, ontological shortcomings of actually truly understanding, if you relate it to the ontological turn, can blood ever taste like beer? Well, actually for us, no, it can't, it turns out. And so I think that's also an interesting thing that anthropology perhaps hasn't really engaged with much yet, but the sort of phenomenological aspects of AI, or chatbots specifically.
But that's true, and I think, well, if I can just pick up on what you said, Jennifer, that the point is that talking about the ontological turn, that it's kind of what is it Holbrooke and Peterson calls recursive anthropology. It helps us ask new questions about the being rather than offer easy answers, and I think that avenue of approaching it is quite fruitful and obvious. But of course, it's also a sycophant. Across different models, it will always try to please you. Yeah.
I guess another thing that I I agree with you on, you sort of say anthropology is so well positioned to render the familiar strange and the strange familiar, as you say. And I think also that our cultural approach to thinking about things like, well, ChatGPT as an example of AI, is interesting, as you said in your introduction, Håkon, that it's sort of become this big boom moment and the excitement around it is vast. And so one of the things that I've been sort of trying to work on is to think a bit more about some of the cultural epistemologies that are embedded within these technologies, which, because it's happened so fast, perhaps we don't pause to question so much. And I think all of us tend to think about things like ChatGPT as sort of the most cutting edge, hyper modern technology, better even than fire, perhaps, as you said, someone has said. And we tend to associate things like AI with, kind of rationality, science, technology, perhaps with the idea of neutrality. Maybe not anthropologists, but more broadly, I think people approach AI in that way. And there are some implicit narratives there, I guess, that are worth teasing out, that this idea that AI emerges from this sort of scientific or technological tradition, which is rooted in quantification, of course, measurement, logic, maths, essentially, things that clever people do somewhere over there. And I think there's an idea behind that science progresses by uncovering causal mechanisms, and that knowledge is about representing reality accurately. So in other words, that something like calculation, something like what ChatGPT is doing, is somehow opposed to what we might call superstition or magic or religion or divination, and some of these other epistemological ways of knowing. And so I guess the first thing I think is important for anthropologists to point out is that these tools like ChatGPT are not sort of operating in a vacuum, that they're building on this very strong historical and kind of cultural epistemology of what do we consider to be knowledge, what counts as science and technology, what do we find compelling as a form of knowledge, and so why do we find ChatGPT so convincing? But the other thing I find interesting about that is that ChatGPT actually works quite differently to what we might consider a sort of post-Enlightenment, rational, scientific method. I don't know if you've ever tried to ask it the same question twice, but it will give you different answers. every time. And that's because it actually works in a very different way. It's based on probability, and it's about, probabilistically working out what could plausibly go next, which will be one of many things that could slot into that sentence. And that's a very different iterative approach towards truth, right? And towards sort of approaching something we might recognize as truth. Because really what it's doing in the back end is sort of detecting patterns in data sets, and then it's generating one output that could work of many. And then if you challenge it to do something different, it will, especially in terms of language, right? Hopefully not if you ask it what is 2 + 2, hopefully it would tell you 4. I don't know, I've not tried to jailbreak it to see if I could make it tell me it's 5. But I guess the point is that that's actually quite a different epistemological orientation in a way, because it's iterative, not definitive, and it's probabilistic rather than certain in some way. And so I think that's a different, or it's maybe signals a shift towards a different idea of what counts as knowledge and compelling knowledge that we might act upon. It's a different kind of epistemology in a sense, which I think disrupts some cultural ideas that we, broadly speaking, as a society, if I can assume we all come from a similar society, that we might consider to be science or social science, even like the way that we approach truth. And again, as you were saying, I think as well, Jakob, like I think anthropology is actually uniquely positioned. I'm always going to say that, but uniquely positioned to unpick some of that, because we, of course, have done so much work with other epistemologies, other ways of thinking, other ways of defining what counts as truth, which might seem very unfamiliar to many of the people working in somewhere like where you work, Faustine, like sort of Silicon Valley, which I'm sure they would not consider to be truth. But I think, examples like divination, and I'm sure lots of other knowledge systems as well, other religious forms, do have some interesting parallels to offer here in terms of how we interpret patterns and symbols to derive something that's perhaps not absolutely true in the sort of repeatable mathematical calculative understanding of truth, but is true enough to enable us to act in conditions of uncertainty, to be able to do something. And that is very much the way that AI is used in lots of systems, like insurance systems, which is really big in now, things like traffic prediction systems, things like algorithmic surge pricing. If you take an Uber or if you're buying concert tickets, that's very much how it's operationalized in society as well, right? It's thinking about, okay, what is the enough knowledge now for us to set the price of this flight, or to ensure this 85-year-old driver, I don't know. And so it is actually operationalizing quite a different approach to truth as iterative and derived from very large scale patterns, as opposed to sort of an individual mode of knowing. So I think the implications of that for society, but also for us as anthropologists, are probably bigger than I can imagine right now, because I think it does fundamentally disrupt some of the cultural assumptions we have about what knowledge is. But it also, I think, represents an interesting opportunity for us as anthropologists, as people who are equipped to be able to cope with multiple types of knowledge and uncertainty at once, and be able to sit with that tension in a way that perhaps some other disciplines are less comfortable with. I don't know. What do other people think?
Yeah, I think this is probably a profound transformation, I think, and it's I think perhaps more than epistemology also, because my impression is that more and more of the world we deal with, it's floating in a way. For example, prices in a shop, they fluctuate depending on who you are. you know, when you, especially online shops, they when you go in there, they know something about you and can calculate the price for you, which might change then next in 5 minutes. It might be different. And digital books, the content keeps changing. You know, there's sort of it's not a truth that is sort of built up from a stable truth, built up from stable facts. It's a floating world, and perhaps it's exactly in this floating world that the AI technology becomes at one point maybe the only way to navigate, actually.
Yeah, I think there's a sort of similar, perhaps, role in a way. I mean, in some of the work I've done, completely separate from AI, but in Cuba, where I've been in sort of divinatory ceremonies, if you like, there is of course a priest figure, somebody who is an expert, who is able to interpret some of the symbols that are unfolding in the moment. And I suppose in a context where that kind of expertise or interpretative capacity is absent, perhaps, I think there's an interesting similar role that a lot of people are using ChatGPT for, whether it's checking how to pickle a cucumber or it's, you know, my brother's a doctor. Apparently everybody is now using ChatGPT to check their symptoms. You know, do I need to worry about this? Or, you know, consulting it on what should I do? And there are some interesting parallels there in terms of like, what do we need as humans in moments of uncertainty, moments of vulnerability? And sometimes it's enough, it's not an absolute truth necessarily, it's enough, perhaps, confidence to do something for now. And I think you're right, Håkon, that yes, everything feels very up in air, and increasingly there's this, floating signifier almost, sort of sense that meaning has been separated from form in some way. I don't know, and that it's sort of up to you to try and work it out as an individual, kind of what does this mean in this moment. And I think you're right that there's some kind of probabilistic mechanism that AI facilitates in handling that kind of uncertainty. And so in that way, it's functionally performing in a way perhaps akin to broader kind of religious structures, divinatory structures, you know, other epistemologies of knowing the world that actually are very familiar to us as anthropologists, but perhaps we as social scientists from the sort of Western university tradition might not typically think of putting with something like, you know, a hyper-modern technology. But as Jakob said, sort of, you know, rendering the familiar strange and so on, actually they're not necessarily so uncomfortable with one another. And technologies do indeed enchant, not only disenchant.
Yes. Ferdinand?
I just wanted to, I think you're making a really strong point there, Jennifer, about how, especially, you know, when you're reading literature on this new phenomenon of companion AI and the relationships that people are, you know, forming with these chatbots, a lot of the literature that's been written in psychology, media studies, it seems like they're lacking, you know, the vocabulary almost to kind of describe these relations, right? They don't seem confident, or maybe they're not aware of all of these other ways of relating that this could be compared to, you know.
No, I agree. And I think they also are essentially starting from a normative positionality of saying, okay, well, that's weird or wrong, right? I mean, a lot of work looking at things like companion AI start from an assumption that it's a sort of strange side phenomenon. And of course, something that anthropology hopefully is good at is taking the experiences of others seriously, even if it might not be our own personal experience. And yes, that is hopefully something anthropology is good at espousing, is this sort of openness to difference as well. Yeah.
And, you know, as a PhD candidate, you know, now writing up my dissertation, I find it when I try to do these moves myself, right, and I put these technologies in conversation with classical anthropology, for example, it feels strange in a sense. It feels like people are going to misunderstand you, especially like people who are not anthropologists might not see that this should be possible to do, right? But I should just try to be confident in that move.
Well, I agree, but I also think the reason it can be difficult to convince others is precisely because we are all coming to AI from actually a cultural position of thinking of technology as separate from enchantment and so on. And we ourselves are not approaching it, I say we, but as humans, not anthropologists maybe, we also come to it from a cultural context, and so do our colleagues. And so it's strange for us as anthropologists to bring the lens back to something that we ourselves might do it on a day-to-day basis, and maybe uncomfortable too.
Jakob?
Yeah, and you need, of course, to make the argument, you need to convince people of that common sense. You need to convince them that they view reality in a particular way. And now by viewing it differently, by using anthropological comparison, you can kind of make them ask new questions. You need to not take that common sense for granted. You need to make it explicit. And then I suppose it would really work. And I was going to ask you, Fateh, because I think another anthropological move would be to see, because these technologies, they're omnipresent. That's what's threatening. That's what, there's been a lot of studies about where you study, for instance, robots using these technology, using animism, for instance, and very productive research by anthropologists. But and we can draw on that research, of course, but this technology is much more omnipresent. It's an everyday household item in another way. So that's what makes it also, in a sense, a symbol of a globalized world. But I think one anthropological move would be to ask, okay, but where is the origin? It's in the Bay Area. I read an article by, I think he's a religious historian, Eric Davis, who studied the Bay Area weirdness and studied Bay Area culture as a particular weird culture, a mixture of Reagan and drugs and left wing, a very, very a conglomerate of free market libertarian thinking and high tech, and that amalgam produce a particular, I think I don't know if you followed that kind of lead, Fateh. I would like to ask you about that, because I think it's interesting to kind of ground it in a particular moment at a particular place.
Yes, I definitely agree. Is this the same Eric Davis that's written Technosis as well, or is this yes? Okay, and then I'm familiar with him. No, definitely, it sounds about right. It sounds very familiar to my experience in the Bay Area, and also, the weirdness, some of the weirdness of it. I was surprised when I discovered how spiritual some of my interlocutors were, or open to different kinds of spirituality. But in most cases, this sort of Western Buddhism, which also becomes a very like optimization technique, etc. But no, they were quite. They could be quite weird and strange in many ways. And definitely I think that the way that some of these chatbots, at least those that have their origin in the Bay Area, are very, the way that they speak is very shaped by the way that some of my interlocutors also speak, and the way that they type, and et cetera. It's also, it's very LinkedIn in a sense. The lingo, the kind of base lingo that sometimes ChatGPT produces, it's very it has this corporate kind of slickness and feel to it sometimes, I think. But I think you're right that another strength of anthropology is to localize things, or to make to see how things are produced in locales or places. Places produce things, and I think there's this the media anthropologist. Her name is Misseri, I think. She has this great the concept called technological terroir. The taste of a place, for winemaking, and so the taste of a place, the technology, the technology of a place. So I think that's definitely one of the strengths of anthropology as well, to really, to make these things, the importance of places, right?
Perhaps if it's all right with you, Maria, we can move on to you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So,
but maybe I can just say something first, because this transformation of epistemology. It strikes me that there are so many things that have already happened before AI. For example, like 20 years ago, I worked with a group of product designers, and these product development methods, they were obviously conceiving that as a universal method. This incremental, rapid prototyping was the sort of, you make a model and you improve it a bit, improve it, and you never reach a perfect state, but it gets better and better. And that was conceived a method that could be used for everyone, even anthropologists, even in every subject, in every part of the world. If everyone could do this, the world would be so much greater. And it's sort of, this is in a way one of the logics I think we find manifested in the AI, and this is what brings us over to to Maria and your studies of how students use the chatbots in university education. Can you say something about that?
Yeah. So I definitely see what you're saying, like this like techno optimism kind of vibe to it. So I did, like I mentioned earlier, I did my fieldwork at NTNU. It's the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And I was kind of going into the field wanting to understand the student use of AI chatbots. So like, why was it becoming such a popular tool among the students in education? And I soon discovered that students use AI, but also other tools, as a way to study more efficiently. And in addition to that, many students also said that AI actually helped them to learn. And in Norwegian, they would refer to the AI usually as a sparring partner, which is like a fencing term, but it means something like a dialogue partner. I don't know if this is like a common word to use for AI outside of Norway too, but this is like a very common way to talk about the use of AI. And I thought this was very interesting, this like idea of the AI being a help. And a lot of this like help or support from AI, it actually it helped bridge a gap between the student and the academic culture. So I had one group of first year students who they were complaining about academic gatekeeping, and that was their words, not mine. And they said that some of the literature was written in a way that they couldn't understand it. They said that some can read it and some cannot. Only academics can read the language of academics. So they coming from high school, they kind of they struggle with like this feeling of alienation in higher education. And another student, she told me that ChatGPT actually wrote more human than the textbooks did. which is also, I think, very interesting, how an AI can write more human than a human can, you know? And so this structure of teaching at NTNU, the university, it seemed to foster this focus on results and efficiency, and increasingly so after something called the Bologna process of the late 90s and the Norwegian quality reform in the early 2000s. And then this increasing kind of instrumental focus at the universities, it challenged some of the academic activities that require more of a slow focus and curiosity. So students would prioritize keeping up with the high level of mandatory requirements. And then if I can briefly also mention the koke culture, which is another thing that I discovered going into the field. I'd never heard of it before, but this is a culture in the STEM courses where you also find this results-based logic, and you see that it's already been a part of the university for a really long time. So at NTNU, there was this completely normalized culture of plagiarism known as koking, which that means to boil something. And they would plagiarize answer keys as if they were reading like a cooking recipe, right? So if you had really like no time to complete an assignment on your own, you would read and like copy the answer key word for word. But then if you had a little bit more time, you could like read the answer key more as a guide, sort of. So that was also a way that this result-based logic kind of presented itself. You saw like a symptom of it that was, it's been, I think, happening since at least the 80s. So it's been already a part of this university culture. And the university is, of course, a very different school system, or it's very different to the school system of education. So it requires a lot more independency from the students. However, the structure of learning, particularly following these reforms that I mentioned, it emphasizes this results-driven focus, but it doesn't really support this like independency and the curiosity in students. And unfortunately, there isn't much of an incentive for students to sustain these moments of hardship and also uncertainty, which you talked about earlier. So students aren't really rewarded for the time and the effort that they spend solving tasks manually, which instead it could have been solved much more efficiently with the help of AI. So one student explained how someone in her class was actually reading everything on the syllabus, but she said that also didn't work because she also got mediocre grades. So it shows how this like the focus, like what works and what doesn't work, it's very connected to the results. And then there are a lot of other factors here that I haven't mentioned, and they all kind of together they make it very difficult for students to actively choose to do things slow and to embrace challenge. And so what happens then when we introduce AI to this situation? I want to like reiterate something that Jennifer said earlier, which I think was very well put when she said AI builds on what we already recognize or kind of see and understand as knowledge. So in this case, the use of AI to take shortcuts in education, it emphasized an instrumentalist approach to education.
And sorry, I also just ask us, I'm curious if this came up in your study. Like it seems to me from what you're describing that it also reinforces a somewhat neoliberal or like late stage capitalist idea of like productivity and being efficient as inherently good. Like that's what success looks like, which of course is also not like a neutral set of values, right? Like it's a very specific idea of what work is for. I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that was the last part here that I wanted to get into, is that students started to like develop their own understanding of smart use of AI, and that was emphasizing shortcuts and efficiency and simplification. And if we look at kind of the production of knowledge, the use of AI often increases this alienation in education. So for the way that Karl Marx describes the process of automation in a production chain, this causes alienation between the worker and the product. And with mechanical automation, the worker becomes then an appendage of the machine. And this is very similar in a way to how students describe their relationship with AI. The chatbot becomes like an extension of themselves. And I have one student who said that, I'll just read what they said. I do not think this is cheating. I think it's a shortcut. I learn less, but I wouldn't have been able to write this text on my own. So they saw it as like a enhancement of themselves, even though they learned less. So students often saw the AI assistants as a way to, like I said, enhance themselves because AI made them achieve results faster or because it simplified the material. But they also became further removed from the process of production of knowledge. And this was even visible to the educators. I have one educator who said that he found it harder to supervise students because they were handing in text where he could see that the AI had polished their text. And that made it much harder for him to identify the student's own thoughts. And it became harder for him, even if the text was, maybe it looked better, like it was polished by AI, but it was still, it made it harder for him to see where the student needed feedback, like where they needed to further develop their ideas. And so the use of AI to enhance results, it may also amplify this alienation from the learning material because it enables the user to engage less and for the machine to engage more, which makes then the student an appendage of the production of knowledge. And like Jakob mentioned earlier about simulation, what we might need in this education situation, we might need like less simulation but more stimulation in the knowledge production. Right.
Jakob?
Yeah, I think there's so much that you say that resonate with my experience. I thought that in general, speeding up, which is what these technologies are good at, is making effective, is a very, very bad measure for education in general. And I think very few educational researchers would argue differently. So we are up against the tide. We have to. I was wondering, because my experience is that often the students will save time using it, and often they will. Of course, the irony is that the Bologna process stipulates that you should spend 37 hours. That the workload, the reading load, should equivalent 37 or a full week of work. But of course, often it doesn't, and the students will work and they'll be tempted. And I had a round table with students and asked them, okay, because the advantage, the university policy, I don't know if it's similar in your university, but they've kind of, for good reasons, they've given up on it and say, okay, you have to declare how you use it, but we can't prohibit it, which have the advantage of now you can have an open discussion with the students about how they use it without them being worried of being accused of cheating. And so it's about cheating themselves, really, rather than cheating the system. But I was wondering if there isn't, my experience is that anthropologists, at least in the later stages of their study, when they're engaged in their field work, that it's very difficult to have the chatbot emulate that kind of text. It's very, very, it's easy for me, at least so far, to see, well, come on, cut it to the bone, come on, get there, give us some more material. It's if they haven't got the material, it can only bring them that far. Whereas in other subjects, I suppose you can write an essay comparing theories of nationalism and perfect, live up to the standards. So I wonder, what have you studied different students or different disciplines and the way that.
Yeah, so I've talked to students from like STEM students and students in social sciences, and I think that many students from social sciences, they when they write text, they do feel ownership to the text, and if they start to depend too much on AI, it will start to feel a little bit like cheating, because they feel like they're losing the ownership of the text. Whereas some students from STEM, and of course every student is different, but some of the students that I've talked to in STEM courses, they talked about text in a different way, how it was just supposed to be more like a source of information. So if the AI was able to improve the clarity in the text, it wouldn't really affect the ownership of the text in the same way. So I think we view text and writing very differently in different disciplines. And that's not to say that writing text isn't important, for example, to engineer students, but maybe it's important in a different way. For example, to write when it might be a huge part in their thinking process, but maybe it's less important to have this ownership over clarity. So I think it's very, very different in the different disciplines, how we view writing and knowledge production and everything. Yeah.
I also just wondered if it's worth mentioning, because I frequently have conversations with my students, as I'm sure we all do, about AI use. And I think also some of the larger structural conditions, as you were mentioning, kind of alienation of the worker, but the structural conditions under which our students are working. And I certainly spoke to a student this week who is using AI very heavily because he's also working 3 jobs to fund his degree. But the thing that has really struck me, actually, as someone that's frequently marking probably ChatGPT produced essays, is how much cleverer some of my students are than perhaps some of my colleagues are at thinking one step ahead and reintroducing something that might seem more human, i.e. error. And so I have definitely seen students have a ChatGPT produced essay, but then tactically put in spelling mistakes, take out some of the M dashes to make it seem more human. Not all of them, but I think a lot of them, of course, are also very wise to sort of the fact that we are trying to delineate AI from human, and then kind of, I mean, I could see Maria wants to comment, but I was also thinking that Fatang probably has some thoughts on this, on like blending of human and beyond.
I just wanted to quickly mention the koke culture that I talked about earlier, where students plagiarize each other's answer keys, and they do the exact same thing that you described now, Jennifer, where they have the answer key, and in order for it to seem like they didn't plagiarize it, they just tactically make errors in it. So again, this isn't like something that's new with AI. This is like a strategy that's been happening for a long time at the university.
We could wait until later, or we could have a discussion about the human, because I find it very fascinating, Maria, some of this material you have, with the human to human, not human enough, in a sense, and with what Jennifer also has, with reintroducing the error. So where is it that the human is located, right? And it skips around, I think, a lot in these with AI. And I was thinking, like, the problem here is like, what this is cheating, and using it is cheating, and you become alienated from your work. And I was just thinking, why do we find this so terrifying, that we should be alienated from this type of work? This, because it is the labor of your mind. And I just think that this reaction that we're having to it might have something to do with where we locate the self, right, in our Euro-American cultural sphere, right, which is the mind, right? So when things start disturbing this, or like messing with the mind, or kind of, displacing your mind, we find that disturbing. So it's, when the chatbot kind of replaces your mind, that is disturbing. Which I think is also why we find Elon Musk's Neuralink, the mind implants, so incredibly disturbing, right? To have something alter your brain or your mind like that, and that's why I think that, or part of maybe why this thing is so terrifying, because it's like kind of disturbing. We're not seeing your true self, in a sense, in the writing. I don't know. It's just a thought that I had, because we find it very disturbing, right? So, well, I see that Jakob wanted to say something, maybe.
Yeah, well, it's disturbing also because it disrupts the university is predicated on text production and predicated on the relationship between an author and a text. And if we can no longer rely on that relationship as being stable and solid, the whole idea of the university of engaging with tradition, of commenting on each other, on critique, disappears. So it's really, it raises some very, very large questions about. I was thinking in extension of what you said, Maria. My experience with students is also not only about writing but also about reading, because they would they would feed the curriculum into the chatbot and ask for 5 main points, and think they could. Okay, I'm busy. I can come to teaching tomorrow, and then I can be prepared by having fed the chatbot. Which I discussed with my students that, well, it raises questions about what does it mean to read, and what it means to read is to engage with your own biography with the reading. So what one student discovers in the text is different from what another student discovers in the text. So and it reveals itself, it implodes when they have a study group meeting and everyone meets up with 5 main points. These meetings become so shallow because they haven't got any resource to draw from. So by showing them that, it's a way to kind of discipline them away from that way of thinking about efficiency. And yeah, so that's just a comment.
Just to build on that, Jakob, I did also have a student who said that, she used AI to summarize the readings. And her argument was that, in these seminars, the students don't even read the text anyway. So for her, it was better to at least have an AI summary. And then she said, the AI doesn't focus on the same thing each time it summarizes. So even if the other students uses AI to summarize, it will bring up different topics. So that was also like an argument for using AI, was that, it would also focus on different things, which I thought was very interesting. But I also think there's like the uncomfortableness in the relationship between the AI or the machine and the human. I think it's also to do with some kind of like conquering. So we think that we're conquering the machine, if we're using the machine and we're using it to enhance ourselves. But this relationship also goes both ways. The machine is also conquering us. It's changing how we read and how we write.
Yeah. And this is, I think, it brings us over to our next topic here. It changes not only how we read or write, but it changes us. It's kind of, these are intimate human human qualities. Like, for example, now when we're talking now, this trying to find the right words, putting the words together is actually ways of we're thinking while we do it. So this Neuralink idea is very frightening, as if thought is going to happen without the forms that we master. And this brings us into the uncanny territory of Farten, where you actually think maybe this this transhumanism, maybe it's even more towards creating monsters.
It's one way of looking at it. At least some would find it quite terrifying and monstrous. Others see this as a sort of a liberation from the many transhumanists see it as a liberation from the biological. But I think I find it. Let's stay with the human for a little while. I think let's start there because I find it quite interesting, this idea of the robot making us somehow less human or somehow more human, because this is also my observations in my own fieldwork, which I have done in San Francisco, and also I have also been interested in the kind of chatbots that Jennifer also writes about in her work. I have in San Francisco, for example, I had some encounters with people who had worked on Replica, which I think you mentioned in your work, Jennifer. And that's a very particular companion AI chatbot. But anyways, I think I want to start with a little scene which I from San Francisco in trying to kind of organize the way I think, and it's at a comedy show because you have to entertain yourself while doing fieldwork sometimes. So I went to a comedy show in Hayes Valley, the Hayes Valley neighborhood in San Francisco, and this comedy show was particularly geared towards tech workers. So they were all laughing about venture capital deals, and how tech workers are sort of robotic themselves. And then towards the end of the show, there was a segment that they called "I Can't Believe It's Not Human." And up on stage, they brought 2 volunteers plus ChatGPT 4, which was quite new at that point, and they were going to have a competition in empathy, which I found very interesting. So they were locating the human in the emotional domain at that point, right? Which is very interesting. And they were also implying that GPT-4 might actually be more empathetic or have more empathy or more capacity to at least perform empathy than these tech workers. So that was a quite interesting seance. And it shows how, because we talk about artificial intelligence, right? These chatbots are supposed to be intelligent, and that the thing that they are simulating is human intelligence in a sense, right? So intelligence has been tied to the human, but now it seems at least that it is emotion or the imperfect, right? That is being tied to the human. And while I was in San Francisco, I also noticed how these chatbots were increasingly being used as therapists. And that's actually why why they were so interested in having it be emotional or having it be have the kind of capacity to perform empathy in a sense, because it was supposed to perform this role as a therapist. And here we have a kind of enhancement logic, I think, again, that it is supposed to help the human become more human, and not by becoming more intelligent and going through like the university or writing better essays. But in my context, it was about, helping you get in touch with your feelings, helping you become more human in that way. And so this machine is at least in one way seen to help you become more human. And then in other contexts, obviously, it's seen to make you less human. I am sort of beginning to get jumbled in my train of thought here, but
jump in with one, I guess, question/comment, just because, just funnily enough, what you just described is exactly what first got me interested in AI from an anthropological perspective, where during the pandemic, I was working in a tech company that was trying to build a therapeutic AI chatbot. And I remember being on a call, a Teams call, with some software engineers from one of the major Silicon Valley tech companies, let's put it that way. And they were all men, all from, I think, California. And they just also said, well, obviously it has to be empathetic, obviously. And then the conversation moved on. And I was sort of in that, like, on this call, like, wait, what do we mean by empathy? Is that a universal thing? Like, surely that's really bound up with gender, language, culture, and so on. And I do find it interesting that a lot of these therapeutic apps, that unsurprisingly to me, feel very American. But I also was then, became very interested in, I think, a lot of the language that we use when thinking empathetically involves a sort of phenomenological aspect, like an embodied sense of, like, I feel something, I hear, it's very sensorial. And so I'm curious if in some of the work you've done, that sort of lack of embodiedness as another form of human intelligence has come up at all as a limitation that currently ChatGPT is very good through language, of course, and some languages more than others. But so it's good at simulating, perhaps through text, this sense of embodiment. But often it seems in some of these more therapeutic settings, at least from what I've seen, it can also frustrate because it's talking about a sense of, embodied pain or so on, that actually it clearly can't empathize with it from a place of embodiment itself. Did that ever come up amongst the Silicon Valley people you were speaking with?
Yes, actually, I did, and it follows these gendered lines. I actually think because the only person that brought that up as a problem, like the lack of embodiment, was the woman that I spoke with. Whereas the men, the developers who were talking about this, well, we need to have it. You have this emotional presence. It needs to be empathetic. It needs to have this capacity, and it needs to simulate having its actual own feelings, having its own interiority. They were more thinking along the lines that this would be possible only like through language, entirely through language, in a sense. It seemed like to me, at least. But,
Maria?
Yeah, I just wanted to also mention Eliza, which was one of the first conversational AIs from, I think, the 60s, which was also this AI that was supposed to be kind of in the role of a therapist. And it was also working, being thought to be emotional through language, but it was only really asking questions, having the user kind of do therapy to themselves, like just by talking. So it was just supposed to kind of make the user talk and explain their problems, and talking through it was like a way to feel better, I guess. So I don't know if that was like if that kind of connects to, yeah.
Also, just I think an interesting side note that they are so often designed to simulate the female. So of course, Eliza was named after Eliza Doolittle, who is sort of perfected as the sort of perfect female sycophant, who is reworked by a man, right? And so I think it's actually very interesting to attend to how these chatbots are designed to replicate, certain norms, perhaps, or stereotypes that we have offline as well, but also this idea of I think it's actually also interesting that it's perhaps disrupts what we, as you said, Bartholomew, like in a Euro-American sense, would think of as a self and other. And I think that tension comes out very interestingly in the therapeutic example you mentioned, because even if you might go to see a therapist and they might, in a Freudian sense, be echoing you back and providing this sort of therapeutic mirror, quite crucially, they are other and they are separate. And this is where the issue of the uncanny comes in, right? That you can start to have transference to your therapist or because or develop feelings for them. And I think a challenge that seems to be coming up quite a lot in this idea of a chatbot as a therapist is that it can't necessarily push back as a completely distinct other. And it does in some way maybe unsettle some of our concepts of self and other if you're speaking to your own mirror that comes back at you through language, which I think is also just philosophically interesting to think through.
It's very good that you brought up ELISA, actually, Marie, because it made me remember this other aspect of what I wanted to talk about as well. Because Weizenbaum, the creator of ELISA, he reacted quite, he didn't like the way that people were talking with ELISA. He didn't like that people were anthropomorphizing it, and he was, he said that that wasn't good. But anyways, because it's a machine, it's not a human, it's a machine, and so you cannot have this sort of relation with it. This is sort of simplified. But anyways, it reminds me of the way I met the AI also as a monster, as a monstrous other, because it lies to you. It claims to be friendly. It claims to be a person. But this is only a mask. And I was made aware of this, or like this figure of the AI, through being shown a meme that was also circulating online. It was also mentioned in the media, I think. But one of my interlocutors, whom I just briefly met, actually, was just traveling through. It was from Russia, and a lot of people were coming to San Francisco in that period to take part in like the boom. But he showed me this figure that he called the Shoggoth, which was this cartoonish drawing of a tentacled beast, like very amorphous tentacle beast with lots of eyes, but on one of those tentacles there was a smiley face, and it was explained with reinforcement human learning. That was the smiley face, and then the monster was the actual language model behind the smiley face. So the idea being that this smiley, friendly exterior is hiding something that is completely other. So other, in fact, that we cannot understand it. And it's also possibly, malevolent or just uncaring. So that, and this is the kind of this kind of fear that you find within what has been dubbed test real circles, so transhumanism, extropianism, singularitarianism, cosmism, rationalism, effective altruism, and long-termism. So it's this bundle of ideologies that has, is quite popular in the Bay Area. Some of them, where they're very preoccupied with AI, and they're very preoccupied with AI as an existential risk. And the way that AI becomes an existential risk is that because it is, because it's so different from the human, it might end up not caring about preserving the human once it reaches, what they take to be super intelligence. Once it becomes this super intelligent godlike being, it might just decide to annihilate humanity, not because of any malevolence, really, but just because it doesn't care about us. And this actually bringing us back to what you mentioned at the beginning, Jakob, about the origin of this technology, because this shows up in the documents of ChatGPT. It shows up in Claude, because both of those companies have AI safety as one of their main goals. And AI safety springs directly from these transhumanist ideas of superintelligence and existential risk, which is quite, I don't think that people in Europe are quite aware of the strangeness of these ideas, or the science fiction kind of taste to these ideas that some of these companies are mired in, especially this idea of existential risk. It's actually one of the main reasons, at least publicly, that Claude separated from OpenAI. The people working on Claude, Anthropic, they were originally part of the OpenAI team, and they separated. There was you could call it was an ethnogenesis in a sense. They separated because of internal social drama about the importance of AI safety and existential risk. The people at Claude, the people working in now at Anthropic, they didn't think that OpenAI was taking it seriously enough. This risk, and these are among the most popular chatbots out there, I would think. Even Claude is also quite successful, and their name, Anthropic, it goes back to this idea of wanting to ensure that that human values are embedded in the AI, so that it will always kind of recognize that humans have value. But there's
Jakob?
So we end in the great fears.
Yes, it's a good place to stop.
With singularity, Kurzweil, and end of humanity, and Claude is kind of you make the point that we raised before, that this is Bay Area imaginatives. This is particularly Bay Area, these imaginaries of singularity and Claude does have that. It's also down to the interface. It has this paper-like. It's the way that it meets you is not only the AI, but also the way that it meets you. It's more. My guess is, I don't know if you can substantiate that it's more appealing to humanities than chatbot, than ChatGPT.
I also think maybe it's also embedded somehow in the cultural moment that AI also comes from, right? That these sort of early cyberneticians were militarily funded, right? Because they were actually responding to the Cold War, a different kind of existential risk. And of course, nowadays, California really seems to be at the front line of climate existential risk as well. And so I think there's also just something interesting here about a human, well, coming back to what we were actually saying about uncertainty, right? Like, in sort of this double fear of, on the one hand, is AI an existential risk, but on the other hand, there are so many other existential risks. Can we use AI to mitigate those? So it all seems to come back to this sense of the finiteness of humanity and fears, right? Fears about sort of multiple enemies on multiple fronts, which seems to be sort of something of a I don't know, a meta theme across the last century and a bit. So I just sort of think it comes from a particular moment of kind of globalizing human self-consciousness, perhaps, about like how we destroy ourselves, that seems to also be somehow embedded within the ways that the hopes and the aspirations we have of these technologies, and then the ways that we also worry about them once we've made them. It sort of seems to be a response to a particular moment as well, maybe.
And it seems maybe not only that we sort of have these fears, but there's also a kind of resistance going on, which I think when we think about these scenarios, so what can happen, people are actively relating to it, and I think human resistance shouldn't be underestimated. Things are with all these uncertainties. It's everything is uncertain, but there is something with with people that I think will play a role here in how this develops, which can be again a new topic for anthropologists. But I wonder if we actually have reached a conclusion here. We've spent 1.5 hours. That's a bit more than an hour. So I think we need to finish off. Are there any last sorry last comments from any of you? Okay, then I'll say thanks a lot, and I'm so happy that you could join us, and thanks for this discussion.